All right, Raider Nation, let's get into the real story that's been dominating every conversation around the silver and black. This isn't about touchdowns or trades. It's about what's been happening behind the closed doors of the Raiders locker room, and trust me when I say it's one of the strangest and most delicate situations the franchise has faced in a long time. So here's the deal. Christian Wilkins, a player known for his energy, his locker room presence, and yeah, a little bit of that eccentric personality, is suddenly no longer part of the Raiders organization. That alone should raise some eyebrows. We're talking about a guy who was expected to be a cornerstone of the defensive unit, a player whose reputation on the field had always been solid until now. The controversy exploded when Adam Schefter dropped a bombshell during an appearance on the Pat McAfee show. According to Schefter, multiple sources inside the Raiders locker room describe a bizarre incident. Wilkins allegedly gave a playful kiss on top of a teammate's head. At first glance, it sounds harmless, right? Maybe even childish. But here's where things take a turn. That teammate did not see it as a joke. He was offended deeply enough, in fact, to file a formal complaint with the Raiders Human Resources Department. Let's pause right there. Think about the magnitude of that. We're not talking about a locker room scuffle, a heated argument, or even a player lashing out in the heat of practice. We're talking about a gesture, one that, while odd and maybe inappropriate depending on the context, resulted in an HR investigation within an NFL franchise. That doesn't happen unless something bigger is boiling beneath the surface. Schefter followed up with a report on ESPN reiterating the details and confirming that the Raiders did in fact investigate the incident. The interaction, according to sources, was described as playful by Wilkins, but that's not how it was received. And when you dig deeper, when you really start asking around, you realize that this might not have been an isolated moment. It might have been the final straw, because here's where it gets even more complicated. Over the weekend, multiple insiders, people close to the team, connected to the players, and familiar with the inner workings of the locker room, said that this story being floated around doesn't match what they've heard. In fact, several of them believe the kiss on the forehead explanation might be a soft spin, a distraction being put out there to downplay something much more serious. Now we're entering murky territory, and let me be crystal clear, I'm not here to speculate for the sake of drama. But when multiple sources say they've heard completely different versions of the incident, versions that include words like grievance, lawsuit, and legal action, it's hard to ignore the signals. It's even harder when respected analysts and former players chime in with comments suggesting Wilkins had already started to fall out of favor inside that locker room. Former Raider Jonathan Feliciano called Wilkins a little freaky, and that's not something you say about a teammate unless there's already a narrative building behind the scenes. Combine that with whispers that Wilkins wasn't vibing with the locker room culture, that his energy had shifted and that players were no longer responding to him the way they once did, and suddenly that kiss doesn't feel so isolated anymore. There's also the timing to consider. The Raiders didn't waste time. News broke fast that Wilkins was out and for a team that invested in him and reportedly like his presence. That's a swift and severe response. You don't pull the plug on a key defensive piece unless you're absolutely sure he can't be part of the future, or unless there's something happening that makes it impossible to keep him around. Now let's circle back to what Schefter said on McAfee's show. The quote that really stood out was when he described the incident as the final straw. Those three words are critical, because if it was the final straw, then there were clearly others before it, and if that's the case, the Raiders may have been keeping a lot under wraps, trying to manage a situation internally before it spilled into the public eye. And that brings us to the legal layer. According to more than one source, there was talk, real talk, of a lawsuit connected to the incident. We're not just talking about an internal complaint or a team suspension. We're talking about lawyers' paperwork, potential damages. That's a whole new level of serious. And it makes you wonder just how far this situation could escalate if more details leak out. But here's where things get even more interesting. While Schefter and others report one version, Pro Football Talk came out and said, very directly, that is definitely not the story that's been making the rounds. Let that sink in. Pro Football Talk, a source with their own deep NFL connection, straight up contradicted what Schefter put on the record. That's not common. That doesn't happen unless different camps are feeding different narratives to the media. So who do you believe? Is this version coming from Wilkins' side? Maybe his agent trying to control the damage, or is it a sanitized version that the Raiders want out there to keep things quiet while legal matters unfold? Either way, the truth seems cloudy, and that's exactly why this story isn't going away anytime soon. And I'll be real with you, this feels like just the beginning. When people start contradicting each other in the media, when insiders say one thing and team-connected sources say another, it's usually because more is coming. We might not have the full picture yet, but all the signs point to this being a deeper, more layered issue than what's currently public. Also, this situation affects more than just Wilkins. It has real implications for the Raiders as a whole, with an HR complaint reportedly filed and the possibility of a grievance being brought to the league. The front office may have to justify their decision, explain their process, and possibly defend themselves against further legal scrutiny. That's not where any team wants to be heading into the season, and it's a distraction. Let's not pretend it's not. Training camp is where chemistry is built, where culture gets established. And now, instead of focusing on installing Chip Kelly's new offense or letting Geno Smith settle into rhythm, you've got a locker room dealing with the fallout of a controversy that no one wants to talk about publicly. That affects morale, it affects trust. And whether you're a rookie trying to make the team or a veteran trying to lead, this kind of story hangs over the entire building. And yet here's what makes it even more complicated. Before this all went down, Christian Wilkins was widely seen as a locker room favorite. Coaches, teammates, analysts, everyone had good things to say. He was respected. So for all of this to shift so quickly, something else had to break down. There had to be a moment or a series of moments where that respect began to erode. And unless someone speaks up, we might never know exactly what those moments were. But one thing is certain: when a player goes from core piece to out he door in a matter of days, and when that exit is followed by HR complaints, legal whispers, and conflicting media reports, yeah, that's not business as usual. That's a franchise trying to keep control of a narrative that's slipping through its fingers. So what's next for Wilkins? Hard to say. If his camp is indeed trying to control the optics, you can bet we will see more carefully crafted statements, more controlled interviews. But if the other story, the one behind closed doors, starts to leak out, that could change everything. Because the NFL is a league that thrives on perception. And right now the perception around Wilkins is clouded, confusing, and possibly combustible. And for the Raiders, they've got to move forward. They've got to answer to fans, to the media, and most importantly to the players inside that locker room, who may still be wondering what really happened. And until that truth comes out, this story isn't going away. Not this week, not this season. Now let's shift gears and get into what happened on the field, because while all this drama unfolded behind the scenes, Day 5 of Raiders training camp gave us plenty to talk about. While the off-field situation with Christian Wilkins continues to cast a shadow over the organization, the Raiders still had to get back to business on the field, and Day 5 of training camp finally brought the moment everyone had been waiting for. Pads came on, and with them came energy, intensity, and a very real glimpse into what this team could start to look like under Chip Kelly and Pete Carroll. Let's start with what we saw on offense, because this wasn't just a light walk-through or soft contact drill. This was real football. You could feel the shift. You could see the tempo change. It was the kind of practice that separates the guys who look good in shorts from the ones who show up when it matters. And if we're being honest, the name that stood out more than anyone else was Trey Tucker. The young wide receiver looked completely locked in from the first snap of team drills to the final whistle. Trey was moving like a man possessed. He beat Jacoby Myers in reps. He outplayed Dante Thornton Jr. He even drew comparisons to some of the more electric slot receivers in the league, with how quick he was out of his breaks and how confident he looked tracking the ball. Geno Smith found him early and often, and you could see that Chip Kelly was scheming ways to put the ball in his hands. Jet sweeps, quick outs, crossers, whatever it took to get Tucker in space, they did it. And Tucker delivered every single time. The connection between him and Geno wasn't just chemistry, it was trust. You could see Geno looking his way on key downs. And that's something that can't be faked 5 days into camp. Not when the pads are popping. Not when the tempo is real. But Tucker wasn't the only one showing out. One of the biggest stories of the day was the return of JPJ to the starting center position. He'd been working with the backups in recent sessions, and there were real questions about whether or not the coaching staff still viewed him as the anchor of that offensive line. But once the pads came on, there was no more experimenting. JPJ was right back where he belonged, leading the first team offense. And let's be honest, if JPJ isn't the starting center, something's wrong. Because he's not just one of the top 5 offensive linemen on the roster. He's one of the emotional leaders of the group. Watching him take control at the line of scrimmage, make protection calls, and get into it with the defensive line. That's exactly the kind of presence the Raiders need in the trenches. Another name that earned buzz was Caleb Rogers. Now this one's interesting. During the pre-draft process and even the early parts of rookie minicamp, there was some skepticism about whether or not Rogers had what it took to hold up against NFL talent, but something clicked. Maybe it was the intensity of padded practice. Maybe it was the scuffle he had the day before with Adam Butler. Or maybe it was just a chip on his shoulder finally turning into fuel. Whatever it was, Rogers looked solid. Not dominant, not flashy, but solid. And in a unit that's still trying to find 5 guys who can be counted on to play together, that matters. Ashton Jeanty, meanwhile, is starting to look like a legit weapon. We already knew the talent was there. The burst, the acceleration, the ability to cut on a dime, but now he's showing the full package. He's catching passes out of the backfield like a seasoned third down back. He's running between the tackles with balance and vision. And now that he's in pads, you can see that lower body strength translate into power. One source who was at practice sent a message that basically summed it all up. A lot of teams are going to regret passing on Jeanty. That's the kind of quote you keep an eye on, especially when it's coming from someone who's seen him up close. Another connection that keeps growing is Aidan O'Connell and Jack Beck. These two are building real chemistry, and it's more than just practice reps. It's the way O'Connell looks for him against zone coverage, the way Beck settles into soft spots and makes himself available. The rhythm between them is smooth, especially when they're going against the twos. And while O'Connell continues to stack solid days, it's clear this is still Geno's team. The way Geno was slinging the ball around during practice was a message. He wasn't hesitant. He wasn't holding back. He was aggressive, finding Jacoby, hitting Dante deep, feeding Trey Tucker, dropping balls into Brock Bowers' hands in traffic. He even connected with Thornton Jr. on a deep touchdown that reportedly went for over 60 yards. And while there were a couple of picks, at least one of them came from a defensive play that was more impressive. Then it was a mistake. Brock Bowers, by the way, saw a heavy dose of targets. And that's exactly what you want in a padded practice. You want to see how a guy like Bowers handles contact, how he blocks in the run game, how he fights through defenders at the top of his route. He didn't disappoint. The Raiders spent a premium pick on him for a reason, and today felt like a reminder of what he brings to this team. Now let's flip to the defensive side, because if there was one guy who looked like an absolute monster out there, it was Max Crosby. Pads on, game over. Crosby was relentless, even in a controlled practice where you can't actually bring the quarterback to the ground. You could tell if this was live action, he would have racked up multiple sacks. It wasn't even close. The offensive line gave effort, but Crosby was just a different beast. That kind of edge pressure disrupts everything. That's why he's the heartbeat of this defense. And the interior, that's where Tyree Wilson's name comes up. The team lined him up at 3 tech again, and he looked powerful, explosive, controlled. All the questions that followed him last season about consistency, conditioning, readiness, he seems to be answering them 1 rep at a time. This isn't just hype. Multiple sessions now, he's looked like a guy who's turned the corner. And with Wilkins now out of the picture, that matters even more. The linebacker room had its share of highlights too. Tommy Eichenberg was once again working with the 1s and 2s. That's a good sign when the Raiders brought in names like Jamal Adams, Devin White, and Jermaine Pratt. There was a legit question of whether Eichenberg would get lost in the shuffle. But he's not. He's holding his ground. And with guys like Omari Gaynor now potentially slipping down the depth chart, it feels like Eichenberg is quietly building his case to be a key part of the rotation. And if there's one surprise name that's beginning to buzz, it's De'Amarian Richardson. Back-to-back strong practices, and now he's making plays in red zone drills, including a pick against Geno that caught everyone's attention. This cornerback room is wide open. You've got guys like Jacorian Bennett, Darian Porter, Eric Stokes, and now Richardson all battling for serious reps. And while competition can be chaotic, it's also exactly what Pete Carroll thrives on. That always compete mentality isn't just talk. You can see it on the field. You can feel it in the reps. Guys aren't taking snaps off, and Richardson is making the most of it. Porter and Stokes also saw time with the 1s rotating in and out during red zone drills and between 20 scenarios. One source described the coverage as physical but aggressive in a smart way. That's what you want from young corners. Trying to establish their identity. They're not just reacting, they're dictating space. And in a defense that thrives on versatility and pressure, you need corners who can stand up, jam at the line, and then recover when things break down. The linebacker group overall brought energy. Multiple sources described them as bringing The thump, that's what you want in padded practice. You want to hear those pops. You want to see guys filling gaps, flying downhill, and laying wood. When the opportunity presents itself, that's exactly what Landon Roberts, Jamal Adams, and Devin White are here to do. They're not finesse players, they're tone setters. And from all accounts, they lived up to that identity today. One lingering concern, though, continues to be deep field coverage. While the secondary has made some impressive interceptions, there are signs that this defense may still be vulnerable to vertical shots, especially when the offense decides to really stretch the field. Some of those picks came because Geno was pushing the ball testing limits. And while that's great for the offense's development, it also exposes the corners and safeties to some tough unknowns. It's early, but that's something to keep monitoring. As for the nickel spot, it seems like Darnay Holmes hasn't done enough yet to separate himself. His name didn't come up much in today's breakdowns, and that might be telling. It sounds like the coaching staff is leaning heavily on their outside corners, rotating them around in a system that demands flexibility. Patrick Graham's scheme isn't built on specialists, it's built on guys who can move, shift, cover, and hit. And right now, Holmes might be getting squeezed out by the depth and versatility elsewhere. Still, when you look at the full picture of Day 5, it's hard not to be encouraged. The offense showed explosion, the defense showed fire, the pads were on, the tempo was high. And while the Wilkins situation continues to swirl in the background, this team, at least on the field, looked focused. But make no mistake, these next few days will be crucial. This is when separation happens. This is when jobs are won and lost. Every rep is film, every mistake is a teaching point, and every standout moment becomes part of the coaching staff's decision tree heading into the preseason. The Raiders are building something. It might not be perfect yet. It might not be polished. But the foundation, it's getting poured, one padded practice at a time. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Your support helps us keep bringing you the latest updates on our Las Vegas Raiders. And don't be shy, drop your thoughts on the news in the comments below. The NFL offseason is never short on drama, but one name that has begun to echo more frequently in recent whispers is linebacker Divine DEABLO. While no official statements have confirmed a dramatic twist in his career path, murmurs surrounding his unexpected exit from the Las Vegas Raiders are gaining traction and emotion. In a recent heartfelt remark that surfaced online, DEABLO didn't mince words when addressing his departure. Era ali que queria crescer no Raiders, translated from Portuguese, the phrase means that's where I wanted to grow with the Raiders, a clear expression of regret, perhaps even frustration, that has only fueled speculation among fans and insiders alike. Sources close to the situation suggest that DEABLO's exit may not have been entirely mutual. While the linebacker had emerged as a promising figure in the Raiders' defense, bringing versatility, speed, and leadership, there are indications of behind-the-scenes tension that could have accelerated his departure. Was it a coaching shift, contract negotiations gone awry, or simply the growing pains of a franchise looking to reinvent itself? Yet again, DEABLO's emotional comment adds a personal dimension to what might otherwise be chalked up as a routine roster move.